Um, Picture the tension at a holiday dinner table where the family dynamics have just completely broken down.
Oh, yeah. We all know that environment.
Right. You know the vibe. You have um, blatant, undeniable parental favoritism on display. You've got siblings locked in this bitter, lifelong rivalry.
And usually some sort of underlying power struggle.
Exactly. Hovering over the entire room is this desperate, manipulative struggle over the family inheritance. It's a deeply uncomfortable, highly relatable human scenario. We've all, either experienced or at least witnessed some level of that kind of dysfunction.
Definitely.
But in the material we are diving into today, the stakes are not just about who gets the summer house or who takes over the family business. The dysfunction we are analyzing literally sets the trajectory for thousands of years of human history.
And I think that jump from a domestic dispute to geopolitical history is what makes this specific narrative so compelling to unpack.
Yeah.
When a family's internal biases, their deceptions, and their psychological blind spots dictate their actions, the fallout is usually contained to their immediate circle.
Right, usually just a messy Thanksgiving.
Exactly. But here, those same deeply flawed human behaviors end up shaping entire nations. They establish borders, the drama is as human as it gets, but the ripple effects are staggering, and they stretch across centuries.
Today's Deep Dive is centered on an incredibly extensive document that breaks down Genesis chapters 25 through 28. It's titled Messing with His Plan.pdf.
It is a dense, dense source.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore how a single family's relentless attempts to manipulate divine promises through deception, psychological projection, and a heavy reliance on their physical senses completely shattered their relationships.
And we're also looking at how a higher sovereign plan completely overruled all of their plotting.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core of this dysfunction starts long before the famous sibling rivalry. It actually starts with the parents, Isaac and Rebekah, and a massive test of endurance.
Right. To map out the psychological landscape of this family, we have to look at the 20-year gap between their marriage and the birth of their children.
20 years.
20 years. According to the text, Isaac is 40 years old when he marries Rebekah. But they are immediately hit with a profound trial. 2 decades of barrenness.
Which, in that culture, was heavy.
Extremely heavy. It isn't until Isaac is 60 that they have children. In the ancient Near East, barrenness carried an immense social and cultural stigma.
Oh, for sure.
But for Isaac, the weight of this was exponentially heavier because of who he was.
Right, because his entire identity is wrapped up in being the promised heir. The central pillar of his existence, the Abrahamic covenant, is the promise of descendants as numerous as the stars.
Exactly.
To sit with that promise and then face 20 years of silence would break a lot of people. Think about the psychological toll of that. For you, listening right now, imagine having your entire life's purpose clearly defined, but the physical reality of your life completely contradicts it for 2 straight decades.
It's a profound cognitive dissonance, and the document suggests this delay was highly intentional. Because Isaac was the promised heir, he had to learn that these massive, world-altering promises require expectant faith. They aren't just biological inevitabilities.
Ah, I see.
For 20 years, their union remains unblessed with children to firmly establish that the heir to this covenant had to be recognized as a direct, supernatural gift. It was granted to their faith, not just a product of human reproduction.
And it's fascinating to contrast this with how his father, Abraham, handled a similar delay.
Oh, the contrast is stark.
Abraham and Sarah tried to force the issue through Hagar, which created a massive fallout. Isaac, to his credit in this specific instance, takes a totally different route. He prays.
He prays, and Rebekah finally becomes pregnant.
But the relief of that pregnancy is immediately shattered by what is happening inside her.
It's a violent pregnancy.
Yeah, the text describes the children literally struggling within her womb.
Wow.
It's such an intense, unnatural conflict that she cries out, "Why is this happening to me?"
She is so distressed, she goes directly to the Lord for an explanation.
And the response she gets completely subverts the established order of their world.
It does. The revelation is that 2 nations are in her womb. 2 utterly antagonistic peoples will be separated from within her. One will be stronger than the other, and critically, the older will serve the younger.
That last phrase is the earthquake.
It really is.
In the ancient Near Eastern culture, primogeniture, the right of the firstborn son to inherit the vast majority of the estate and the family leadership, was the absolute bedrock of society. To say the older will serve the younger is a total dismantling of their cultural rule book.
It's a direct challenge to human tradition. By designating the younger son as the heir before they take a single breath, the text makes a profound theological statement.
That biology doesn't dictate destiny here.
Right. It asserts that this choice does not rest on the superior merit or the birth order of the child, but purely on sovereign prerogative. It's a supernatural revelation meant to guide this family.
But instead of aligning with it, the parents end up fighting it.
Tooth and nail.
And you see that tension materialize the moment the twins are born. The first baby comes out reddish and covered in hair, losing the name Esau, meaning hairy.
A very literal naming convention.
Very literal. Then his brother emerges, and his hand is physically clutching Esau's heel. So he gets the name Jacob, which literally means he who takes hold of the heel.
But it carries a much heavier figurative meaning.
Right, because he who trips up or supplants.
And the physical birth perfectly foreshadows their psychological profiles. As they grow, their dispositions are completely polarized.
Total opposites.
Esau becomes a wild, skilled hunter, a man of the open fields. He's bold, daring, and constantly roaming. Jacob is described as an even-tempered, gentle man who prefers the domestic life of the tents. They are fundamentally different human beings.
Which brings us to the fatal flaw in Isaac and Rebekah's parenting. The text explicitly tells us that Isaac loved Esau, and the stated reason is jarringly superficial.
It's because he had a taste for wild game.
Yes. Isaac, who the text portrays as a quiet, somewhat passive, and retiring man, becomes utterly infatuated with the rugged, aggressive nature of his hunter son.
Meanwhile, Rebekah, who we know is dynamic, energetic, and highly assertive, favors the quiet, homebound Jacob.
Our source material highlights a really profound irony here regarding parental psychology.
It does, and it's a dynamic we still see today. Parents often project their own unmet needs onto their children, or they favor the child who possesses traits entirely opposite to their own.
So Isaac is passive, so he finds a vicarious thrill in Esau's wildness.
Exactly. And Rebekah is naturally dominant, so she finds comfort and an easy dynamic of control with the gentle Jacob.
It's a glitch in human nature. How often do parents lean toward a child because that child compensates for the parent's own insecurities?
All the time.
An unathletic parent pushes the sports prodigy. An anxious parent clings to the docile, compliant child. When parents operate based on their own psychological deficits rather than the distinct needs of their children, they lay the foundation for a shattered family.
And the source text connects this right to the Apostle Paul's later warnings to not exasperate or embitter your children. This blatant, unapologetic favoritism essentially weaponized the brothers against each other.
It creates an environment where love is treated as a zero-sum game.
That's a great way to put it.
Esau and Jacob aren't raised as brothers. They are raised as competitors in a household where affection is conditional and tied to utility.
And that highly toxic environment is the backdrop for one of the most famously disproportionate transactions in history.
The bowl of stew.
Yes.
This is where the psychology gets so intensely interesting. The setup is simple but loaded. Esau comes in from the open fields, completely famished. Jacob is cooking a red lentil stew.
Esau demands it, saying, "Feed me some of the red stuff because I'm starving."
Which is actually what earns him the lasting nickname Edom, meaning red.
Right.
But rather than just handing his exhausted brother a bowl of food, Jacob sees an opening.
Jacob's response is incredibly predatory. He says, "First, sell me your birthright."
Just zero hesitation.
The swiftness of that demand indicates Jacob had been analyzing his brother. He was waiting for the exact moment of peak vulnerability. He knew Esau's impulsivity, and he ruthlessly exploited the physiological stress of hunger.
And Esau just caves. He dramatically claims, "Look, I'm about to die. What use is the birthright to me?"
A total overreaction to being hungry.
Completely. Jacob locks it in by making him swear an oath. Esau eats, drinks, gets up, and leaves, and the narrative drops this incredibly heavy assessment. So, Esau despised his birthright.
Let's pause and actually define what he threw away, because if we don't understand the weight of the birthright, we can't fully grasp the insanity of the trade.
Please do. What exactly was on the table here?
In the context of Isaac's family, the birthright was multifaceted. First, it meant you were the recognized chief of the tribe and head of the extended family after the father's death.
Okay, so political and familial power.
Right. Second, it entitled you to a double portion of the physical wealth and inheritance.
Massive financial loss.
Huge. Third, and critically, in the ancient world, it made you the spiritual leader, the priest of the family who mediated on their behalf.
Wow.
But fourth, and most uniquely for this specific lineage, It meant inheriting the covenant promise made to Abraham. That means possession of the land of Canaan and direct covenantal fellowship with God.
So he traded tribal leadership, double wealth, the priesthood of his family, and a literal covenant with the Creator for a bowl of carbohydrates.
Because his blood sugar was low.
It's easy for us to sit here and judge Esau, but this is a deeply human bug in our operating system. We all have that bowl of stew. For you listening, what is your bowl of stew? What is that moment where the stress of a Tuesday afternoon makes you completely compromise on a long-term goal or an ethical standard just for 5 minutes of comfort or relief?
That's the real takeaway here.
Esau's brain prioritized the immediate screaming demand of his physical senses over a massive but distant abstract promise.
And that is the defining characteristic of Esau's psychology. He embodies addictive, compulsive behavior. He cannot think beyond the immediate gratification of his sensual desires.
His appetite completely overrides his rational thought.
And his spiritual capacity. The cunning hunter of animals became prey to his own physical impulses. But we also have to examine Jacob's role here.
Right, because Jacob is the one who ultimately carries the promise forward, but his methodology is completely sociopathic in this moment.
Jacob understands the immense spiritual and material value of the birthright, which is to his credit. But his willingness to use extortion against his own brother, denying him basic hospitality and compassion, shows a severe moral deficit.
He values the right thing, but he employs a deeply unethical strategy to secure it.
The source document brings in a really fascinating historical comparison here. It looks at the two major instances in Genesis where a firstborn loses their rights: Esau and Reuben.
Oh, that's a brilliant parallel.
It is. Esau considered his birthright to be of such little value that he liquidated the entire thing for one meal, and the total package went to Jacob.
And Reuben.
Reuben, later in the Genesis narrative, forfeits his birthright because of impulsive sexual promiscuity. But in Reuben's case, the rights were fractured and divided among 3 brothers. Judah took the regal leadership, Levi eventually assumed the priestly role, and Joseph received the double portion of the inheritance.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, both men were hijacked by their physical senses. Hunger for Esau, lust for Reuben, and both lost generational legacies as a result.
The overarching principle is that prioritizing fleshly, immediate appetites burns down structures of lasting spiritual worth.
And this failure to trust long-term promises over immediate physical threats isn't just an Esau problem. It's a generational trauma in this family. We see it play out with Isaac shortly after this, when a severe famine hits the land.
Famine was the ultimate existential threat in the ancient agrarian world. The standard survival tactic was to migrate down to Egypt, which had the reliable waters of the Nile.
Isaac naturally considers this route.
But God intervenes with a specific prohibition. Do not go down to Egypt. Settle down in the land that I will point out to you. God tells him to stay in Gerar, and in that moment, God officially transfers the immense Abrahamic blessing directly to Isaac.
God promises to be with him, to multiply his descendants like the stars, and to give them the lands. But God is asking Isaac to trust the invisible promise while standing in a visibly dying, famine-struck landscape.
Which is a massive test of faith.
So Isaac obeys, he stays in Gerar. But almost immediately, the psychological pressure of the environment cracks him, and he commits the exact same sin his father Abraham committed in the exact same place.
The historical echo here is uncanny. The men of Gerar notice Rebekah's beauty and ask Isaac about her. Isaac is paralyzed by fear. He assumes these men will murder him to take his wife, so he lies and says she is my sister.
Just like his dad.
Exactly. Somewhere between 70 and 97 years earlier, Abraham pulled this identical deception in Gerar. The king in both accounts is referred to as Abimelech. Now, Abimelech is a Philistine royal title, meaning royal father, much like Pharaoh, so it's likely a different ruler. But the behavioral pattern of the patriarchs is perfectly mirrored.
Fear completely overrides their faith.
It does.
But the way Isaac gets caught is so specific and revealing. They are living there for a long time, keeping up this lie. Then one day, King Abimelech looks out his window and sees Isaac caressing Rebekah.
The lie implodes.
Instantly. The king summons Isaac, rightfully rebukes him, and points out the catastrophic guilt Isaac could have brought upon the entire kingdom if someone had unknowingly taken Rebekah.
This is where the linguistic depth of the Hebrew text provides a stunning layer of analysis. The document highlights a brilliant wordplay.
I love this part.
Isaac's name, Yitzchak, literally translates to laughter. The Hebrew participle used in the text to describe the caressing or sporting he was doing with Rebekah is metzachek. It is direct, undeniable play on his own name.
So the text is embedding a theological critique right into the vocabulary.
Exactly. The narrative is subtly declaring that Isaac's lapse of faith, his cowering in fear and lying about his wife, made a mockery of the great promise that was embodied in his very name.
True faith is supposed to laugh in triumph because it rests securely in the promises of God. But fear mocks faith.
Isaac received the direct promise of divine protection, but his fear turned his identity into a punchline. He endangered the very blessing he was supposed to carry.
And yet, despite Isaac actively jeopardizing the covenant, the grace he's shown is staggering. He stays in Gerar, he plants crops in the middle of a devastating famine, and he reaps a 100-fold harvest in a single year.
The Lord blesses him so intensely that he becomes a massive economic powerhouse.
His flocks, herds, and workforce grow so large that the local Philistines become intensely jealous.
And their jealousy manifests as economic warfare. They go out to the wells that Abraham's servants had dug decades prior, and they systematically fill them with dirt.
In a desert climate, plugging a well isn't just vandalism. It's an attempt to erase a person's ability to survive in that land.
The tension escalates to the point where King Abimelech directly tells Isaac to leave because he has become too powerful for them to manage.
Here's where it gets really interesting regarding Isaac's response. He has a massive household, a small army of servants. He has the resources to dig in and fight for what is rightfully his. The wells belong to his father. But he chooses a completely different strategy.
He yields.
He moves away to the Gerar Valley and patiently begins the arduous work of reopening his father's old wells.
This represents a significant shift in Isaac's spiritual maturity. Consider the dynamic. God initiated this conflict by blessing Isaac with such extreme abundance that it threatened the local population. God is deliberately exposing Isaac to frustrating, burdensome opposition.
The wells are tangible proof of God's blessing. But every time Isaac tries to access that blessing, he hits a wall of hostility.
Right. His herdsmen dig a well. The locals fight them for it, so Isaac names it Esau, meaning dispute. They dig another one, more aggressive quarreling ensues, so he names it Sitnah, meaning opposition.
It's a crucible. God is backing Isaac into a corner to show him his own inadequacy, stripping away his ability to rely on his wealth or his rights, and forcing him to yield.
And Isaac passes the test. He refuses to retaliate. He accepts the inadequacy of his own strength and chooses to wait for God to clear the path.
He moves again, digs a third well, and finally, there is no dispute. He names it Rehoboth, declaring, "For now the Lord has made room for us."
The ultimate validation of that yielding strategy happens shortly after. Isaac moves up to Beersheba. God appears to him that night, explicitly telling him not to be afraid and reaffirming the blessing. Isaac builds an altar.
And then King Abimelech actually comes to him.
Yes. King Abimelech, along with his military commander and advisor, travels to Isaac. Isaac is understandably confused. He asks, "Why are you here? You hate me and drove me away."
And the king admits, "We could plainly see that the Lord is with you." They asked to form a binding peace treaty.
It's the perfect resolution to Isaac's patient endurance. God proves that divine blessing cannot be thwarted by human opposition. God frustrated the Philistines to the point where they had to acknowledge Yahweh's supremacy and seek peace with the man they just exiled.
They hold a sacred feast, swear an oath, and that very day, Isaac's men strike water in a new well, which he names Sheba. It's Isaac's finest hour. He navigates the opposition through faith and peaceful reliance.
It is a beautiful high point. But the tragedy of Isaac's life is that he couldn't maintain that spiritual vision.
No, he really couldn't. As the narrative shifts from the open fields of Gerar back into the intimate, claustrophobic space of his family tent, we see Isaac's reliance on his physical senses trigger a total system failure for the entire family.
The fuse for this explosion is lit by Esau. At 40 years old, which is the exact age Isaac was when he married, Esau decides to take 2 wives. But he chooses 2 Hittite women, local Canaanites.
Which is a massive red flag. The text notes this brought great anxiety or a bitterness of spirit to Isaac and Rebekah.
Abraham had gone to extraordinary oath-binding lengths to ensure Isaac did not marry a Canaanite, because the Canaanites were morally and spiritually compromised, operating under a historical curse.
By marrying them, Esau is actively polluting the purity of the Abrahamic faith line. He demonstrates zero interest in the spiritual separation required by the covenant. He just wants to integrate and elevate himself within the pagan culture around him.
Esau's blatant disregard for the family's spiritual mandate makes Isaac's next move completely baffling.
It makes no sense.
Isaac is now in his old age, and his eyes are so weak he is effectively blind. He knows the prophecy from God that the older will serve the younger. He knows Esau despised and sold the birthright. He knows Esau married Canaanite women.
And yet, in direct defiance of all that theological data, Isaac decides he's going to secretly execute the ultimate spiritual blessing and pass the covenant to Esau.
Isaac's old age isn't just a physical decline, it's a total spiritual system failure. He decides to orchestrate this holy, generational passing of the torch, and how does he prepare?
He focuses entirely on his stomach.
Entirely.
He calls Esau and says, "Take your weapons, go hunt some wild game, and prepare for me some tasty food, the kind I love. Then I will eat it so that I may bless you before I die."
Our source draws a sharp, devastating contrast between Abraham and Isaac here. Abraham ended his life with robust character, spiritual clarity, and success. Isaac's twilight years are defined by decay.
At this critical juncture, Isaac's sensuality has completely hijacked his theology.
He knows what God said, but his parental favoritism and his physical appetite for wild game are making the executive decisions. He is willing to subvert the will of God for a good meal.
But the secret plan leaks. Rebekah is listening at the tent entrance. She overhears the plot, and her reaction is immediate, calculated, and ruthless.
She goes to Jacob and issues a command. Go to the flock, bring back 2 choice young goats. She will cook them exactly the way Isaac loves them, and Jacob will take them in to steal the blessing.
What is incredibly telling is Jacob's reaction. When presented with a plot to deceive his blind, aging father, Jacob expresses no moral hesitation.
None at all.
He doesn't argue that it's unethical. His only concern is the logistics of the con. He tells his mother, "Esau is a hairy man, and I have smooth skin. My father may touch me. I'll be exposed as a trickster and bring a curse on myself."
He is just worried about failing the physical inspection.
Rebekah, undeterred, absorbs the risk. She says, "Let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say." She prepares the meat. Then she takes Esau's best garments clothes that carry the distinct scent of the fields and dresses Jacob in them.
And then she takes the hairy skins of the young goats and actually binds them to Jacob's hands and the smooth part of his neck.
When we look at the goatskins and the disguise, the really fascinating part isn't the trick itself, it's the systematic, catastrophic failure of Isaac's physical senses.
Isaac has lost his sight, which Scripture frequently uses as a metaphor for a lack of spiritual vision. Because he lacks spiritual discernment, he relies entirely on his remaining physical senses to verify the truth. Jacob and Rebekah weaponize those senses against him.
Jacob walks into the tent. Isaac asks, "Who are you, my son?" Jacob delivers a brazen, direct lie. "I am Esau, your firstborn."
Isaac is immediately suspicious because of how quickly the hunter returned. He asks, "How did you find it so quickly?"
And Jacob crosses a terrifying line. He pulls the Almighty into his deception. He says, "Because the Lord your God brought it to me."
That is a chilling portrait of a man consumed by ambition. To look his blind father in the face and use the name of Yahweh to validate a fraudulent claim shows a staggering level of spiritual detachment. He is utilizing the language of faith to execute a con.
Isaac's hearing makes him doubt. He says, "The voice is the voice of Jacob." So he switches to a sense of touch. He demands Jacob come close so he can feel him. He runs his hands over the goat skins on Jacob's arms.
Touch deceives him.
He accepts the physical texture over the cognitive dissonance of the voice. Then he switches to taste. He eats the meat, he drinks the wine, and his bodily appetite is satisfied.
Taste deceives him.
Finally, he relies on smell. He pulls Jacob in for a kiss, breathes in the scent of Esau's garments, and declares, "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field."
Smell deceives him? The source material pulls a brilliant theological thread through this moment. It connects Isaac's failure to other catastrophic biblical failures rooted in the physical senses.
Like Adam and Eve.
Right. Adam and Eve failed in their eating, choosing the physical appeal of the fruit over God's command. Noah failed in his drinking, leading to exposure and familial curse, and Isaac fails in his tasting and touching.
The text is screaming that relying on physical senses for spiritual discernment not only proves fallible, but it inevitably fouls up human life.
Isaac completely abandoned the spiritual skill of discernment, that ability to differentiate truth from error based on God's word. Instead, he surrendered entirely to what felt, tasted, and smelled right to his failing body.
When you step back and view this scene objectively, you see the profound, simultaneous failure of all 4 family members.
That's a complete collapse.
Isaac is actively trying to derail God's prophecy to satisfy his appetite and his bias toward his favorite son. Esau is fully complicit, happily going along with a plan to steal back a birthright he legally swore away, proving he has zero integrity.
And Jacob is operating like a sociopath, lying repeatedly and blaspheming God's name to secure power.
And we cannot overlook Rebekah's failure. On paper, Rebekah is the only one advocating for the correct theological outcome, the younger son receiving the promise, as God decreed.
But her methodology reveals a total lack of faith. She does not trust God to manage his own prophecies. She seizes the initiative, orchestrates a highly manipulative, deeply unethical deception, and even invites a curse upon her own head.
All to forcefully engineer an outcome that God had already guaranteed.
It's the ultimate cautionary tale about trying to help God out.
How often do we know what the right ethical outcome should be, but instead of exercising patience, we panic? For the listener, think about times you've used manipulative tactics, or bent the truth, or forced people's hands because you didn't trust the timing.
Rebekah and Jacob successfully steal the blessing, but the immediate fallout is like a bomb going off in the tent.
Jacob gets the prophetic blessing lordship over his brothers, abundance of grain and wine, but he barely escapes the tent before Esau walks in.
Esau prepares his wild game, brings it to Isaac, and says, "My father, sit up and eat, so that you may give me your blessing."
The realization of what has just happened hits Isaac with physical force. The text says Isaac trembled violently. He asks, "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him."
And then, amidst that violent shaking, Isaac utters a profound theological submission. And indeed, he will be blessed.
That violent trembling is such a visceral detail. Why is he shaking so hard? It's not just the shock of being conned by a goatskin.
He is trembling because he experiences a terrifying moment of spiritual clarity. In that split second, Isaac realizes he hasn't just been tricked by his wife and younger son. He realizes he had been actively, stubbornly fighting the sovereign will of Almighty God.
And God had just forcefully overruled his carnal preferences.
He recognizes that his attempt to subvert the divine prophecy failed miserably. By declaring he will be blessed, Isaac is finally throwing in the towel. He submissively accepts that the fulfillment of the covenant was never subject to his personal manipulation.
The emotional whiplash for Esau is brutal. He hears his father's words and lets out a loud, bitter cry. He begs, "Bless me too, my father. Do you have only one blessing?" He breaks down, weeping.
But Isaac has nothing left to give him but the grim reality of his future. The blessing Isaac gives Esau is essentially a prophecy of hardship.
It reads like a curse.
It does. Isaac tells Esau that his dwelling will be far from the earth's richness and the dew of heaven. He will live in barren, desolate lands. He will live by the sword, a life of perpetual conflict, and he will serve his brother.
He adds a small caveat that eventually Esau will grow restless and tear his brother's yoke from his neck, but the overarching picture is one of harsh, violent marginalization.
That grief instantly hardens into murderous rage. Esau holds a deep grudge against Jacob and begins plotting a fratricide. He says to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob."
Rebekah's intelligence network picks up on Esau's plot, and she realizes her brilliant scheme has brought her family to the brink of total annihilation.
She summons Jacob and tells him he has to flee immediately to her brother Laban in Haran. Her instruction is to stay there for a few days until Esau's fury subsides and he forgets the betrayal.
Her logic is desperate. Why should I lose both of you in one day? Because if Esau murdered Jacob, Esau would be subject to the law of blood vengeance and forced to flee, leaving her with nothing.
But the tragedy of their communication breakdown is that Rebekah can't even tell Isaac the truth about why Jacob needs to leave. She can't admit what she's done.
So she pivots to a highly manipulative, though factually true, excuse. She leverages her well-known disgust for Esau's Hittite wives. She goes to Isaac and dramatizes her anxiety. "I am disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, what good will my life be to me?"
It's masterful manipulation, and it achieves her goal. Isaac summons Jacob, explicitly commands him not to marry a Canaanite, officially bestows the full Abrahamic blessing on him one final time, and sends him away to Paddan Aram to find a wife from Rebekah's family line.
This raises an important question. Looking at the absolute wreckage of this family, you have to evaluate the outcome. Did Rebekah and Jacob actually win anything through this elaborate deception?
That is the ultimate tragic irony of this entire deep dive. They gained absolutely nothing that God hadn't already promised to give them, but the cost of their impatience was staggering.
The family completely fragments, never to be whole again.
Rebekah told Jacob to leave for a few days, but according to the biblical timeline, Jacob is gone for 20 years. There is no record that Rebekah ever saw her favorite son again before she died. She lost the very thing she schemed to elevate.
And Jacob's prize for his sociopathic deception is 2 decades of grueling exile. He essentially exiles himself from the very inheritance he just stole.
The source material explicitly connects Jacob's fate to the principle in Galatians 6.7. A man reaps what he sows. God does not let Jacob's sin slide. Jacob used deception in the dark to trick a blind man. He is sent to his uncle Laban, who turns out to be a master manipulator himself.
Laban deceives Jacob repeatedly, changing his wages 10 times.
In the ultimate poetic justice, Laban tricks Jacob into marrying the wrong sister, Leah, under the cover of darkness. Jacob the deceiver spends the prime of his life being relentlessly deceived.
And decades later, Jacob's own sons will take a slaughtered goat, dip a coat in its blood, and use it to deceive Jacob into thinking his favorite son Joseph is dead. The goatskin deception echoes through his life, causing immense pain.
It is a stunning, terrifying display of how God can utilize the sinful, flawed actions of humans to accomplish his sovereign purposes, while simultaneously holding those humans entirely accountable for their toxic behavior. They didn't thwart God's plan, but they brought 20 years of misery upon themselves.
And we can't ignore the epilogue of Esau here because it highlights his persistent spiritual blindness. Esau sees Isaac send Jacob away simplistically to avoid marrying Canaanite women. The light bulb finally goes on for Esau that his Hittite wives displease his father.
So, in a misguided attempt to earn his father's approval and show he can follow the rules, what does Esau do? He goes to the family of Ishmael and marries one of Ishmael's daughters.
This is fundamentally clueless.
It is a profound lack of spiritual capacity. He thinks he's fixing the problem by marrying within the extended family, completely oblivious to the fact that Ishmael was the rejected line of the covenant.
He fundamentally does not understand the theology of the Abrahamic promise. He's trying to solve a spiritual deficit with a superficial, fleshly compromise.
And the long-term geopolitical consequences for Esau's descendants, the Edomites, play out exactly as Isaac prophesied in that harsh blessing.
The source document provides an incredible historical timeline that traces the fallout of this sibling rivalry across centuries. The Edomites settle in the rugged, desolate mountainous region southeast of the Dead Sea, the barren lands Isaac predicted. And the prophecy that the older would serve the younger becomes historical reality. The Edomites are repeatedly conquered and subjugated by the Israelites.
The historical arc is massive. King Saul fought and defeated them. King David decisively conquered them, establishing garrisons throughout Edom and making them vassals. They attempted a revolt during Solomon's reign, but failed.
They remained subject to the kingdom of Judah for generations.
It wasn't until the reign of King Joram of Judah that they finally managed a successful rebellion and set up their own king, fulfilling the part of Isaac's prophecy about Esau eventually tearing the yoke from his neck.
But the conflict doesn't end there. It's a volatile, bloody border dispute for centuries. Judah subjugates them again under King Amaziah. They break free again during the reign of Ahaz. Then, jumping far ahead to around 129 BC, we see a critical turning point. The Hasmonean leader of Judea, John Hyrcanus, launches a massive campaign against the Edomites, who were known in the Greco-Roman period as the Idumeans.
Hyrcanus conquers them entirely and forces them to either convert to Judaism and submit to circumcision or face exile.
That forced assimilation by John Hyrcanus creates one of the greatest geopolitical ironies in history. By forcing the Idumeans into the Jewish nation, he inadvertently sets the stage for their ultimate revenge. Because the Idumeans are now technically Jewish citizens, an Idumean family navigates the political chaos of the Roman occupation. A man named Antipater, the Idumean, gains favor with Rome, and his son is eventually appointed by the Roman Senate as the king of the Jews.
King Herod the Great, an Edomite, a direct descendant of Esau, ruling over the descendants of Jacob with an iron fist right at the time of Christ.
The struggle that literally started with 2 twins fighting in Rebekah's womb scales up to an Edomite king slaughtering infants in Bethlehem. And the Idumean dynasty maintains power all the way until the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70.
It is a breathtaking scope.
Yeah.
The writing prophets of the Old Testament consistently point to Edom as the ultimate archetypal enemy of God's people.
It perfectly illustrates how unresolved familial conflict, rooted in a rejection of spiritual promises in favor of immediate gratification, doesn't just dissipate, it metastasizes. The antagonistic temperaments of those 2 boys became the foundation for over a millennium of warfare and political subjugation.
A truly heavy legacy.
So what does this all mean? When we pull all this together from messing with his plan.pdf, we're looking at a profound masterclass in human self-sabotage.
We see the terrifying generation-spanning damage caused when parents project their own needs onto their children and weaponize them through favoritism.
We see the very real danger of the bolus stew mentality, allowing the immediate demands of our stress, our hunger, or our fear to completely override our commitment to long-term ethical and spiritual standards.
And perhaps most significantly, we see the absolute futility of using deception and manipulation to try and force an outcome. Rebekah and Jacob thought they had to act unethically to secure the promise, but their lack of faith only purchased them decades of pain, exile, and a fractured family.
The overarching lesson is the tension between sovereign grace and human responsibility. God's ultimate plans are not fragile. They will not be derailed by our failures. But our failures carry a very real, very bitter cost.
Absolutely.
Which leaves us with a fascinating, mind-expanding paradigm shift to consider as we wrap up today. We've dissected how Jacob's lie and Rebekah's scheming completely detonated their family structure and sent Jacob into a 20-year purgatory of being conned by Laban. But strip all of that away for a second and look at the core theological fact established before chapter 25 even started. God had already declared to Rebekah that the older would serve the younger.
The outcome was predestined by a sovereign God before the twins had brain activity.
So, what if Rebekah and Jacob had just done nothing? What if they had firmly refused to manipulate the blind patriarch? What if Jacob had said, "No, I will not put on the goat skins. I will not lie to my father. I will trust God"? How would God have fulfilled his own promise?
Would Isaac's stubborn, meat-drunk attempt to bless Esau have miraculously failed on its own?
Would Esau have tripped on his way to the tent? We can't know the exact mechanics of what would have happened, but it forces you to look at the tension between your own free will and the outcomes you are desperately trying to control. How many times do we absolutely wreck our own peace and damage the people closest to us by deploying manipulative high-anxiety tactics to forcefully engineer an outcome that would have naturally resolved itself if we had just maintained our integrity and waited?
A very convicting thought to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the lives of Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Esau. Keep questioning your own bowls of stew, keep learning, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.